The Kalam cosmological argument is stated as follows. Premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Today I'm going to be defending the second premise of the Kalam cosmological argument. This is actually the second video in a series I'm doing on the Kalam, where I'm going through and defending each premise individually. So if you haven't seen the first video, I would suggest that you go back and watch it before watching this video. It's titled, Defending the First Premise of the Kalam Cosmological Argument. Now, in the first video, I defended the notion that everything which begins to exist has a cause. But in this video, I'm going to defend the notion that the universe itself did in fact begin to exist, which of course means it had a cause. Now, without a doubt, this is the most disputed premise of the Kalam, but today I'm going to explain why it's a perfectly sound premise. In this video, I'm going to provide both scientific evidence and philosophical arguments for the finitude of the universe. One of the best scientific theorems for the universe having a beginning is the Guthva theorem, which states any universe which is on average expanding throughout its history cannot be infinite into the past, but must have a past space-time boundary. And this proof holds independently of any physical description of the early universe. The theorem basically states that with every expanding universe, all you have to have is an average Hubble expansion rate greater than 0, and it's going to have a beginning. The best way to explain this is to analogize it like Vilenkin does. So let's say there's a spaceship passing by Earth at 100,000 miles per hour. And of course the galaxies would be expanding away from us at 20,000 miles per hour because of the expansion of space. Now keep in mind that space is expanding between the galaxies. So of course by the time this spaceship gets to another galaxy, what the observers see is that the spaceship is coming at them at 80,000 miles per hour, 100,000 miles per hour minus 20,000 miles per hour. Now, if you keep that analogy, of the expanding universe and the slowing down of the relative velocities within the universe itself, as you keep going backwards through time, you're going to get to relative velocities which are increasing. So if you go to the future, it decreases, and if you go back in time, it increases until you eventually reach the speed of light in a finite proper time. And you won't surpass that with a relative velocity in any universe remotely resembling our universe. Vilenkin says that's a boundary to space-time. Now, the space-time boundary could be a mark on a pathway to another kind of physics, or it could be a complete beginning of the universe itself. However, let's suppose it's a pathway to another kind of physics. If that's the case, then that universe with its different physics only has to meet one condition, which is an average Hubble expansion rate greater than 0. And if that's the case, then it too must have a boundary to space-time. So at some point, you're going to reach the point where you're actually going to have a beginning of all the beginnings. Now let's move on to the philosophical arguments. So on top of the scientific evidence, there are very good philosophical reasons for thinking that the universe had a beginning. One of the philosophical arguments for a finite universe goes something like this. Before today could exist, yesterday would have to occur, and the day before that, and the day before that, and so on to infinity. But if the past keeps going on infinitely, then there's no point at which we could start counting the days backward to today. So in other words, if the universe is infinite into the past, then how did today ever get here? Of course, the answer is since today did get here, the universe can't be infinite into the past. Another good philosophical argument for the universe being finite is Peter S. Williams' argument. The argument is stated as follows. Suppose I ask you to loan me a particular book, but you say, I don't have it right now, but I'll ask my friend to lend me his copy, and then I'll lend it to you. Suppose your friend says the same thing, and so on. If the process of asking to borrow the book goes on forever, I'll never get the book. Therefore, if I get the book, the process that led to me getting it can't have gone on forever. At some point down the line of requests to borrow the book, someone had to have the book without needing to borrow it. I'm sure you can see how this relates to the universe having a beginning. If the arrival of today required an infinite number of prior events, it would never have arrived. You can't traverse an actual infinity. So since today did arrive, the process that led to it couldn't have gone on forever. The last philosophical argument for a finite universe is found in the writings of Plotinus. The argument states that anything that is composed of parts presupposes that those parts had to be put together and in the right order. This is something that we know both experientially and conceptually. No one has ever observed something composed of parts coming into being without those parts being put together. And there isn't any scenario where we could imagine something composed of parts coming into being without its parts being put together. And of course, something external has to put those parts together. Now, how does this argument relate to the universe? Well, the universe is composed of parts. Therefore, its parts had to be put together at some point in the past, which of course means that it cannot be eternal. And this goes for any other universe that might have preceded our own, because it too would have been composed of parts, which means it had to be put together at some point in the past as well. The only place this process terminates at is when you reach something that is absolutely simple or non-composite, something that is not composed of parts, and that of course is God. So now that we've examined both the scientific evidence and the philosophical arguments for the finitude of the universe, we can see that we are justified in accepting the second premise of the Kalam. Now, in the next video, I'm going to defend the conclusion of the Kalam, which is that the universe has a cause, and I'm going to explain why that cause must necessarily be God.